Alright, hello students. Today we're going to be talking about new patterns of trade. In our last class we talked about exploration and colonization. Um, Colonization in the Americas, both North America and South America, and the different European countries that explored over there and colonized over there as well. Our objective for today is kind of similar to this. What are the characteristics and effects of the new patterns of trade between colonies and their mother country? And how does the African slave trade impact the world? So that's basically what we're going to be looking at. Excuse me. So the Columbian Exchange is our first main big term for today to really understand. The Columbian Exchange was a large scale exchange between both Europe and the Americas. And by exchange, I mean the trade between goods and like animals, crops, also diseases. We talked about diseases last time. So different types of foods. It's kind of hard to understand now because we can get, sushi rice from China. We can get fish that was caught in the North Sea or something like that, because we've established that trade together back and forth. I mean, it might cost more, but back then, really, they only ate the food that was grown, just around their area. And we're going to be talking about and looking at some of the different foods and resources that the Americas had that Europe didn't have. So the Columbian Exchange continued. Some of the effects of the Columbian Exchange were the impacts that new foods and animals had in Europe and also in South America, North America, all the colonies within America that got colonized. So present day, 1/3 of all food grown in the world originates in the Americas. It's pretty crazy, okay? And you might not have known this, but when you think of Italian food, what's one of the first fruits? You might think it's a vegetable, but it's actually a fruit. What's one of the first, just whatever, vegetable, fruit? What comes to mind? What's one of the first foods? What comes to mind? Pizza, lasagna, spaghetti, marinara sauce. What all is in that? Tomatoes. Did you know that tomatoes didn't originate in Italy? They're actually a fruit that was grown in South America. It's kind of crazy because when you think of Italy, you think of good tomatoes, marinara sauce, pizza. They didn't have that before the exchange of goods from the Americas back to Europe. Kind of weird. There's a bunch of other fruits and vegetables and foods and animals that were exchanged back and forth between Europe and the colonies in South America. So societies around the world had to change. In Africa and Asia, okay, so Africa and Asia, they didn't have corn. Corn was another vegetable that was grown in the Americas that other parts of the world didn't have. Now, corn, what's special about it is that it's really easy to grow in lots of climates. It's a nutritious food, and when it grows, there's always a lot of it. Okay, so corn is, when it grows, there's a lot of corn. It's nutritious, and it can be grown in lots of different parts of the world. So the climate that corn needs in order to grow is found, not just in one specific area, but China has that climate, Africa has that climate, South America has that climate, North America has that climate. So it can be grown in a bunch of different areas. So the importance of corn is if you live in a country where you have a large population, then corn can provide the food necessary to sustain that life. So corn was really important. So there were both negative and positive effects of the Columbian Exchange. Now, hopefully you can pretty much guess what the negative exchange of the Columbian Exchange was. Killed a lot of people, were lots of diseases, and a bunch of those diseases are explained in your book as well. Here is a another slide. Now, on one part of the slide, you see the Americas. On the other part, you see Europe, Africa, and Asia. Okay, so on the yes, your left side of the slide, you see a whole list of animals and fruits and vegetables. What I want you to do right now is go ahead and write down all the fruits and vegetables and animals that you think were grown in the Americas, and do the same thing for Europe, Africa, and Asia. So if you think bananas were grown first in Europe, Africa, and Asia, then you'd maybe draw an arrow down there. So you can draw arrows, you don't have to write it out. So if you want to just draw arrows over to the continent which you think those were first grown in, then do that. So go ahead and do that now, and I'm going to pause myself. Mr. Napier, this is your cue. Pause me while you all do that, and then we'll catch us back up to speed, and we'll see which one is right and which one's wrong. Okay, so in the Americas, llamas, corn, peanuts, pecans, or pecans, however you want to say it. Actually say pecans. I don't know why I said pecan, because I don't say pecans. Vanilla, pineapples, chili peppers, tomatoes, and chocolate are all native to the Americas, specifically South America. So chocolate, they had no idea what chocolate was in Europe until the Columbian Exchange happened, until explorers came over and talking to the natives said, hey, have this piece of chocolate, check this out, and they were like, oh, this tastes pretty good. We'll bring it back over to Europe and try and sell it. Chocolate didn't really become very popular in Europe until, well, number one, it was expensive, so if you had chocolate, you had to be rich, so you must have been royalty, but it wasn't really popular until they started to add sugar to chocolate to make it sweet, because chocolate is really bitter. My mom used to have a big Hershey's tin of just crushed up cocoa powder, and she would make our own chocolate icing with that. Instead of buying chocolate icing from the store, she'd just make it from scratch. But one day I went in there and opened up this big old can of Hershey's cocoa powder, and I thought it'd be really sweet and taste good. I got myself a big old tablespoonful, put it in my mouth, and it was awful. Like the most bitter, ice quenching, just like, ugh, it was terrible. So what you have to do to chocolate powder in order to make it good, in order to make it into Hershey's like milk chocolate, add some milk, add some sugar, you're good to go. In Europe, some of the animals and vegetables and fruits and other types of stuff, cattle, like cows, bananas, coffee. Okay, some of our best coffee now is grown in South America, in Colombia and Guatemala, and Peru and Chile. Coffee grows in South America now, and you go to Starbucks, and a lot of times you'll see on the package, this was grown in Guatemala or Costa Rican coffee. So without the Columbian Exchange, South America would have never been able to grow coffee. Horses came from Europe. Crazy, because when we think about the history of the United States and the Wild Wild West, one of the first animals that pops in your mind should be horses. Without the Columbian Exchange, without the exchange between goods and animals and all that types of stuff during exploration and colonization, there would never have been horses in the Wild Wild West of the United States. Sheep, oranges, goats, house cats. Ugh, I hate cats. Why? Why did they come over here? I don't know. So those are some of the animals and fruits and vegetables. Pretty interesting stuff. So what is mercantilism? All right. This has kind of the same root words as merchants. And if you're a merchant, back then, you probably owned a ship, and you traded and sold goods from different parts of the world. So the basic principles of mercantilism is wealth, competition, trade, development of raw materials, and the colonies giving back to their mother country. And so by mother country, I mean that if Spain colonized, or let's say Portugal colonized Brazil, okay, they made colonies in the area we know today as Brazil. Okay, those areas wouldn't be Portugal They would just be colonies of Portugal. So whatever they grew out of those colonies they'd give back those resources to their mother country of Portugal. So it's kind of the same thing with the English colonies in the North American coastline. Those colonies would give their resources back, like cotton and stuff like that, back to England, their mother country. So mercantilism is this competition between colonies, between countries of what they're growing, what they're producing, what they're selling and trading. So the balance of trade, this gets kind of not confusing, just pay attention here. So while these different European countries are colonizing different parts of the world, Asia, specifically, China, Indonesia, other parts of the world where they're trying to find resources that would be profitable. In order to make money off of this, they're not only taking it back and giving it to their mother country, but if they had kind of a monopoly, which a monopoly is, it's kind of a hard term, but if you have a monopoly on something, it means that you are the only source for people to buy that from. So let's say you had a monopoly on chocolate. It means nobody else can buy chocolate but from you. Okay, so in order to get money off of the goods and resources that they're getting from their specific colonies, they would sell them to other countries. Okay, but they also had to tax. So if another country wanted to buy a good that was sold from Spain, there would be a tax on that. So those taxes would go back to the country that was selling the good. So let's just make this simple. If I had a good and I bring it to class and I made it, and let's say half the class lived in my country, let's say my good is cinnamon rolls, okay? So I bring in a bunch of awesome, tasty cinnamon rolls. And half the class is in my country, and I just sell those cinnamon rolls to them because they're in my country for $1. However, the rest of the half of the class, you all are British people, and since you don't live in my country, then I'm going to tax these cinnamon rolls, and it's going to be $1.25, and that extra 25 cents is going to go back to me, and it's going to be a profit. So that's what these tariffs were for. So it was really important to manufacture these raw materials that were coming from the colonies. So in the North American coastline where they grew a lot of cotton, those were owned by the British, and that cotton, those raw materials would be sent back to England, and that would then be produced in the textile factories to produce actual, like clothes and stuff like that, cotton shirts and sheets and all that kind of stuff. Now, it was really important my voice just cracked, in order for the government to become, governments from these different countries to become profitable from colonization, was they would give people government subsidies, which is just the government would give business owners money in order to start up a business in those colonies. So it was really important to start up business in these colonies so that their mother country would become more profitable from the resources sent back. So that's just what a subsidy is. If you have questions about that later on, let me know. And basically the overall idea of this balance of trade is each country, so Spain, Portugal, the United Kingdom, all these countries that were really seeking to explore and colonize different parts of the world. I mean, it was a competition. Each country wanted to become rich and wealthy, and so they were trying to control the overseas resources and raw materials from the other country. Moving on. Alright, we've already talked about balance of trade, tariffs and imports, manufacturing. Let's see here. Basically, I've already just said quite a bit of this. So this balance of trade, as we know, is really important. They have these tariffs and import taxes. Manufacturing is important of the raw materials. So I'm trying to say stuff that I haven't already said already. So it's really important to control these overseas resources and for your country to be self-sufficient. And you really didn't want your country to have a lot of dependence on other countries' resources, or else you'd be paying a lot of those tariffs, a lot of those taxes, in order to get those goods from another country. The colonies' relationship to their mother country, this was essential for mercantilism, for this business interaction, for the economy of the mother country. Uh, Strict laws were enforced on the colonies. Colonies produced the raw materials. They would get sent back to their uh, mother country where they would be produced in factories. And then those colonies would a lot of times be forced to buy goods from the country that they're being colonized for. One good example of this is in North America, how the British colonies would send back cotton, would send back all types of agricultural crops that were grown here in the colonies. They'd send it back there, and then they would have to pay taxes on the manufactured goods that were sent to the colonies from Great Britain, which kind of is backwards. It's a little bit backwards and not very fair because they're sending them resources, and then that same country that is colonizing them, they're having to pay taxes for those goods. So it's like you're British and you have a British colony and you're living in a colony in North America, yet even though you're British, you're still having to pay taxes that if you were living in Britain, you wouldn't have to pay. Kind of confusing, but that's just part of the relationship between colonies and their mother country. Moving on, we're almost done. So the origins of the slave trade, as you'll notice in this top right-hand picture, it looks like a triangle of red arrows. What would happen, and as we've talked about, the diseases that spread throughout the Americas from the Europeans that came over and explored killed a lot of the natives. And since they killed a lot of the natives, they were lacking a lot of work. By they, I mean the explorers, the people who owned the colonies. They needed people to work their land. So what they ended up doing is they looked towards parts of West Africa. They looked to get Africans to come over and work the land there for free. And as you'll see here is this triangle is called the triangular trade from Europe and then Africa and then over to the Americas. And they would get most of these slaves from West Africa. They would either kidnap them or they would trade them from these African kings over there, not like civilized kings as we think of, but kind of these African tribal leaders. They would a lot of times sell them rum and sugar and different types of resources that were manufactured in Europe for actual people. So these African rulers would sell people for alcohol. Pretty messed up. And those slaves would then be used for cash crops like tobacco and cotton in North America. So those slaves would be sent to plantations. And this was because there was a shortage of labor in the Americas due to all the diseases, and which killed a lot of Indians. So this is called the triangular trade. So Europe, all the mother countries there in Europe who have colonies in the Americas, I know I'm doing a lot of hand gestures, then go to Africa to get slaves, which are then shipped to the Americas. Okay, so it's a triangle type deal. All right, Europe, Africa, North America. The other term that comes out of this is the Middle Passage, which the Middle Passage is important because it was the 3 to 6 week voyage that these slaves had to go through in ships from Africa to North America. So they would just be sold or kidnapped and then put on a ship, just cram-packed in there like sardines without hardly any food, any fresh water. They were down at the bottom of the cargo part of the ship. They didn't have a place to go to the bathroom, so a lot of them got sick because, as you can imagine, being side by side next to somebody in a ship going over waves for 3 to 6 weeks without any place to go to the bathroom be pretty disgusting by the end of your voyage. Only 10 to 20% of those slaves normally survived the actual voyage. Pretty terrible. So slavery in the colonies. Living conditions were bad. Slaves were property, not viewed as people. There was lots of physical and emotional abuse that would go along with being a slave and being owned by a slave owner and having to work these lands for no money. You were separated from your family, so your brother might be sold to a certain plantation owner in Georgia, and then you would be off in South Carolina somewhere and you'd never see him again. So there's obviously that emotional abuse that these people had. They had to work long hours and still provide for themselves as well. Some of these jobs, they worked in mines, plantations a lot, different parts of towns and the countryside. Some of them worked as carpenters, metal workers, and women often worked domestic jobs, just in houses, cleaning, cooking, taking care of the kids of the plantation owners. So, all right, some of the effects of the slave trade was, well, obviously, if you're a slave, you're not going to like having to work for somebody who doesn't treat you fairly, and you're not going to like working for no money. So, of course, there was a certain amount of resistance that would often come out of this. So they were treated as property, not people. They didn't have any freedoms, and what they did to kind of resist being a slave is they tried to keep their cultural and traditions alive within their slave community. Just in order to kind of escape the idea of being a slave, they still took their culture and traditions, their music, their food, and brought that over just so they'd still have that African identity with them. So there was 400 years of slavery in North America, which ended up being 15, at the end of this, there's 15 to 20 million slaves in the Americas after 400 years. Okay, that's a whole lot of people. So this devastated not only these slaves emotionally and physically, but also in the areas of West Africa where all of these slaves are being pulled from. It devastated those communities as well. And only the strongest were taken, and it divided these African communities. So if only the strongest part of, so if you're in a West African society and only the strongest part of your people are being taken out of, it's really going to weaken your whole society, your whole civilization there. African diaspora is a term used in order to describe the diffusion of African culture. So even though all of these people are coming from West Africa, they still are bringing different parts of the culture and from different parts of West Africa and mixing them in North America in order to have that identity as being in African. So some examples of this is different types of music that we hear, blues and jazz music. I'm trying to think of some food that we get that is kind of descended from African roots, like Cajun food. That would be an example of different types of examples of African diaspora that you could actually see. All right, that's the end of our discussion today about new patterns of trade. Make sure you go at the end of this lesson to answer our objective question for the day on Canvas, and I will see you next time.